shows she drew on that piece of paper. It was an airplane. Now, why I have shared this in this information, because the effect of terrorism is not only on the adult minds but also to the children, or the effect of terrorism doesn't matter to the age through which a person is coming up or coping through those mechanisms. In the next slide, what is terrorism? First, we have to understand that the word terrorism contains terror. So, terror nowadays doesn't only mean the fear which is caused through terrorism, but nowadays, after September, like from the very incident of September 11, it showcases us that terrorism is not only a concept of rising fear among the citizens or any particular group of people, but also it's a concept of revenge. Whenever there is a attack or there is any faults or in the loopholes of the government or any particular group of citizens, there is always a counter attack to those propositions. Maybe it may be verbal, it may be physical, it may be a revolution causing this. And in this all of these slides I have also footnoted the 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 main like from where I have taken my sources. The sources are in this all of these first 8 slides are by the words of Arthur H. Garrison. He presented like he lectured on this global terrorism in the Oxford University. In the next slide, which I have presented, is two codes, which means first one is warfare seeks to conquer territories and capture cities, and then terrorism seeks to hurt a few people and to scare a lot of people. Now, the first thing which we have to focus is to hurt a few people but scare a lot of people. This is a total paradoxical relationship between the concept of hurting someone in a mere physical, like in a mere particular area where he is famous for, and also the effect of that hurt can cause to the change of mentality or the change of any cause in a larger scale. And then there is this famous quote that putting the horror in the minds of the audience and not necessarily on the screen. This is the effect of September 11, we all know. And this is the picture which was showcased in the shelter, like which was merely a form. I cannot put the global name, I cannot remember it, but the main name was for the shelter for the hunger and uh, reveal or something. I'm not so sure, but it showcases that I am scared. This impacts, like this limelights the effect of scare, or the main purpose of terrorism to scare a larger group of people. And the first point where the terrorism arises is for the educational deterrence. Like we all know that only technological or or any education from the books doesn't claim a person to be educated in a society. The educated minds should also be in the global perspective of their own changes with the society, or how they are how their perspective through their own minds also matters a lot. Now in these pictures we can see that two peoples are discussing among themselves, and the professor or the teacher are showcasing two things. One is technology and another is human brain. So through this we can also perpetuate that the human minds invents the technology, the human minds also destroys the technology, because in these two scenarios where one laptop is open but the professor is seeing from the laptop or teaching from the laptop, and then again they are also conceptualizing the idea to among other larger scales of people. Now, what is the early history of terrorism? Terror has been used to achieve political ends. We have a plenty number of a plenty number of evidences where we can prove this point. And first is like this is the most ethical concept of terrorism is the resistance to Roman occupation. And from that terminology, terrorist, the concept of terrorism occurred through the minds of the people. Now, terror in this scenario, terror was used to resist a specific occupation because they did not like that the group of people like merging with those group of people, those who are of lower caste or of the lower society, cannot be matched the minds of the higher educated societies. And then the concept comes of suicidal martyr. this is a famous concept. Like in all of the terror attacks, we can see that all the peoples are giving their lives, and mostly I would not name the religion or any specific groups, but we can see that the concept of going to heaven or the difference between going to hell is a very educated, lacking the loop of education in their own minds. That is not any education given by the teachers or by any individuals. It is their own perspective through which, like, the nation should grow their citizens in a more visualized way. And terrorism against the enemy is often viewed as a religious act. Now the word this is a purely theoretical factor. Like, all the theoretical concepts are in this slides. Like, the terrorism was first coined in the French Revolution's region or reign of terror, and the this was the birth of government sponsored terrorism. Maybe this was the birth of government sponsored terrorism, but now all the governments, like countries, all the countries are trying to just accommodate or just end this government sponsored terrorism. But in every system or in every government, there are certain loopholes which not only terrorism or not only the high minded intellectuals and bureaucrats can catch, but it's among their own ethics and morality through which they can conquer the fight of terrorism. And then it is obviously shown, like, there is a huge blurriness between terrorism and political violence. And the till 1990 and 1995, the goal of terrorism was against the political evasions and not to some extent of citizens. But now in this current modern scenario, not only a government bureaucrats or any government political groups, the individuals are also being targeted through the larger scales of terrorism. And now this comes the modern history, where anarchists have like studied the concept of terrorism. And here first comes the individual terrorism of Lincoln assassination. And also, if we see the concept of terrorism, we also should see the perspective of the government, how they're reacting to it. We know the famous attack of two in the main member of Al Qaeda. I would not take the name, but the government has taken a huge step. Within a single period of night, they have taken down the whole base of that specific terror group. And now there comes the second attack, is that propaganda by dates, which means the terrorist attacks, like the terrorist acts, is a tool of communication. Nowadays, mostly in our country, we see that there is a terrorism attack just to meet their demands. If the demands are not met or any negotiations are not done by the countries, then they will successfully plan their terrorism. Now, in the middle 20th century, terrorism became a tool used by both sides of colonial conflicts. In colonial conflicts, I mean, before 20th century, the concept was that only specific countries are the masterminds of terrorism. But nowadays, every country, and in their own governments, they have their inter-terrorism country also, and then comes the international terrorism group. And in the last 20 years of the 20th century, religious based terrorism became more and more frequent. Another format is economic terrorism, which distracts the industry and agricultural system, because industry and agriculture are the main important factors which holds the economy of a country. So if now, because with the evolution of the society or the evolution of technology, not only the minds of the highly educated masterminds are socializing or they are evolving, the minds of the terrorism and the terrorists are also increasing. And this is the concept of asymmetric warfare, where terrorism warfare is used apparently random or unpredictable violence, like in a surprise, like men. So,
Continue.
So am I audible here?
Yeah, yeah, you're audible. Perfect.
Yes, sir. So nowadays government has also implemented many of the schemes, like or they're training their uh, own army in a very violent nature and in a very uh, asymmetric nature, as it means that the terrorists also would not predict that they will face this type of actions or any type of government. So in counter to that, the terrorist attacks have also been in a very surprising manner, as the government cannot predict or all the economics cannot predict this. And the key of asymmetric warfare is using unexpected unconventional tactics in combat, like uh, in a period after the September 11 attack was done, we this is a very like all of us, or in the history books it is not written, but 12 there is also a book known as 12 strong men, where it shows that the US has sent 12 uh, and there 12 of their special task forces, and they combined with the northern alliance with the Afghanistan, and the Afghanistani terrorists has faced the Al Qaeda's and all the other troops, Talibans, who were in the conquer with uh, in Afghanistan. So the terrorists would not predict that the government is merging with the terrorists, another terrorist, to face this type of warfare. And what are these terrorism conclusions, as it means the concept of terrorism? So terrorism is an ancient tactic. It means that nowadays also the terrorist uses the horse as a medium and not tanks or cars. Many of the troops are there in northern states or the northern countries, where horse is their main mode of transportation, and not a highly equipped technological cars. And terrorism is a mode of communication, as I have also explained it. And terrorism is a special type of violence and asymmetrical warfare. Terrorism is used in times of peace, conflicts, and war, because they know that in the times of peace, conflicts, and war, they can gather the crowd in a more perspective, or in a more number of people. Terrorism is designed to make a point, which means fear, and terrorism is a political act. Now, the concept of bioterrorist attacks comes in the picture. The main there are plenty of, I have also given the examples in this, but uh, the main physical, the structure is like for 5 years is taken to make the bacteria or any of the disease or any biological harm they can do to the other country. And this is executed in a single one day, it's less than one day. And then the diagnosed case are the 3 days, and then the first date, and then a plenty number of dates occurs. Now, terrorism is different from regular crime because of its strong political properties, and also the tactics and also their vision. Like in a regular crime, the vision is a very smaller perspective. In the terms of terrorism, the definition of terrorism can vary from people to people, because your ideologies can be different and my ideologies can be different. But the main point where we conclude that both of our concepts will conclude that they are not a good thing in a country, or they are
Can you
always.
send me the link again now?
You can continue, Sovic.
Okay. They are always in a standpoint to fight against someone and not for someone. And one person's terrorist can be another's fighter. People claim that other from other countries that the troops are coming or the soldiers are coming, they can be a terrorist for that country, but for the people of the states of those troops are their own fighters. And for the first step of prevention is education. Education does not only mean the main primary education of books. We also have to think out of the books and all the pages which we have read, and the masterminds are already educated. We have to understand that education does not mean material factor, that we have to understand the concepts. It's the basic line and the basic difference between what is the morality and what is ethics. And then there comes the understanding of the differences in cultures, religions, beliefs, and human behaviors. We have seen that all the religious texts which we read, we have our own views to it, but that own views does not mean that religious texts are against a human body. They are for the human body, like in the mind that we have to save someone and not to kill someone to save myself. Then comes the think of the peace, freedom, and equality, and eliminate the root of terrorism. The root of terrorism here I meant does not the main bodies or the main heads of those terrorist groups. It is the mindset of the people who are involved in terrorism. Then comes the secondary step of prevention, which deals with the security of the nation, which means establish surveillance and monitoring system, and then improve protective system for citizens, which all the countries are prevailing in this current scenario. And then come tertiary prevention, which means the geographical location, like early detection of the sources and prevent the extension of impairments. If we catch hold of one terrorist, then we can also, nowadays we have seen in plenty of cases in our own country that where a capture of one terrorist has given uproot to a number of larger terrorist groups. And then rescue the survivors and console the rest of the population. And console the rest of the population means getting out the fear in the mind that terrorism is still present over the government of those particular country. And then comes the types of terrorism. The first one is domestic terrorism, where in a specific country there is inter-terrorism, which means that the people are fighting among themselves or in their own country with the government. And international terrorism is there is a conflict between one terrorist group and another country's any acts or any government or any revolutions they are implementing. And what are the methods of terrorism? First is firearms, which includes the primary bullets, ammos, and guns. And then comes explosive and incendiary devices. Explosive devices refers to all the types of different bombs in a very small scale. Like if a F-19 or 9/11, like the bombs which was used in smaller scales in Mexico or Italian, which was scaled only up to 20 meters of the distance. But in incendiary devices, it refers to 100 meters or more than 15 kilometers. Also, we have seen in the history. And then come chemical agents. Chemical agents are the like the releasing of the chemicals which affects the human body. And biological agents are the implementing any bacterial disease, or mainly it includes diseases through which a whole nation can shut down. And then comes nuclear weapon. And this is a first step, like this is a primary stage, as I have also mentioned here. It is from the 1994. It At that point of time there was packages outside, like packages which includes the bomb, but nowadays there are no such kind of packages. Even a small mobile phone can carry a larger type of danger than a normal human being. And then comes chemical agents. Chemical agents, in this here I have given an example of an incident like destroying livestock or ravage crops. And some of these agents are like while you are sleeping through the pipelines of the city, the chemicals can be discharged and you are dead within 1 hour or 2 hours of that disposal. And they can have an immediate or a delayed effect. An example is the very much beginning of the chemical terrorism started from this incident, which is the serine nerve agent. It was attacked in Tokyo, and 12 people were killed and 53 people were injured, and this was within a span of 2 hours. Like they have implemented the chemical through the pipelines of the whole city. And then when they, like some of the people are the 12 people were the unheaviest people which were taken away, but the 53 who were injured, they were lifetime, like they were always through a medications for the lifetime. And then come biological terrorism, where the dispersal of microbes or the toxins to produce illness. The parts of infection can be contained. And uh, if we compare this in the modern news or in this modern scenario, we can also see that many countries or many nations have claimed that COVID-19 is also a biological terrorism, but there is no proof that we can claim that biological terrorism. And microbes such as bacteria, viruses, toxins. And is this something new, as in what are the historical evidences which can claim this chemical terrorism? It was in the city of Crimean Peninsula, and plague infested corpses over the walls of the city to infest it was implemented because the healthy people which were living, they were all infected by this plague. And then comes the 18th century French and Indian War, where the British officers gave blankets of the smallpox victims to Indians, those who aligned with the French. And this caused an epidemic in tribes. And through this incident, also, we can claim that education does not only mean reading books or something. Like British officers, they are not uneducated, but their morality and ethics are totally in the loop of their own government. And these are the motives, some of the incidents I have also given. And if we focus on some of the incidents, till AUM shrinkyo, all of these incidents were against the government. But then comes Dr. Suzuki incident, where it was for the revenge and not in a very bad manner. And the anthrax was used in incalculate fear, as it means. It was used in World War One and World War Two by not only the Russian and USA forces, but also the small allies which included. And then comes to what are the response we can get to bioterrorism is the early detection of those diseases and slowly craving through the medicine terminologies which we can implement to save the lives. And then is nuclear terrorism. Nuclear terrorism is the spreading of radioactive materials. This is not only for a specific geographical territory, it includes a whole nation or a larger perspective to determine its point or to stable its point. And no use of nuclear material for non-military terrorism has ever occurred. And this is a survey before the incident, like after the incident of 9/11 took place. If you can see that due to homicide is not a very common way of dying. It was it was 1 lakh. And the same, and homicide cannot take place in a very larger amount of people in a very less time. But terrorism attack in 2001, it started like same as the homicide sector. And then terrorism attacks in 1990s were much more heavier, as because terrorism attack in 1990s were against the government. So to increase the attraction of the government or to meet their demands, they need to focus on a specific group. But in the 9/11 attack, it was not for any negotiations or any meeting their demands. It was for the revenge. And what occupation has had the greatest risk of death from terrorism? This was a question to the audience, but I'll give the answer now. The occupation which was mostly affected through terrorism is the political bureaucrats or the famous economists or any leader of a specific terrorist. And why in 2001 it like the concept of terrorism drew many of the minds? Because the scale of dying, the scale of death before 2001 and after 2001 is a very much difference in the statistic report. And death rate increased by 500 times in 2001 due to September 11. And overall, the death rate of terrorism has not been high despite the low risk, shock, surprise, and fear engulfed in the United States and war. And to conclude that terrorism is obviously an unlawful act, and terrorism has a history to prove its evidence and the fear it has emerged. But for me, my from my perspective, I think that terrorism is not only a concept of fear, because they there lies the fear concept, but with also, if we engulf that fear, we can easily destroy terrorism. But before destroying the terrorism, we have to know the uproots of terrorism and change their perspective, because this is a evolution society, and we are, as a whole nation or the whole world, is growing stage by stage. Though we have to keep in mind that terrorists are also developing, not only we as a normal human being are developing. And terrorism can be conducted through firearms, explosive devices, and biological, chemical, nuclear materials. But all of these includes that the minds of both the sides, the terrorists or the counter-terrorist teams, both of them have the human minds which are playing the vital role here in this scenario. And even though the events of 2001, the risk of dying from terrorism has remained much lower than that from motor vehicles, smoking, and alcoholic beverage. Thank you, sir.